right now, we've got breaking news we want to pass along to you tonight. It is sad news. Black Panther star Chadwick Boseman has died after losing his fight with cancer. Boseman's spokesperson saying that he passed away at his home in the LA area with his wife and family by his side.
They had fame, wealth, and millions of admirers around the world. Yet despite all their success, they faced an enemy that treated celebrities and ordinary people exactly the same: incurable disease.
My differences were a very important part of who I was. When I did first get vitiligo, my mom was, she was worried, you know, it was something that she hadn't heard of before.
Some were diagnosed with conditions so rare that even doctors struggled to understand them.
Bernie made a statement back in February of 2005, claiming that he was living with a rare, mysterious respiratory illness, sarcoidosis.
Some died suddenly and without warning. Others fought devastating illnesses for years before finally losing the battle. These are the 19 black celebrities who died from incurable diseases. Number 19, Bernie Mac. He could make an entire arena roar, but backstage, his lungs were the site of a slow war that had been raging for 2 decades. Bernie Mac carried sarcoidosis through nearly his whole career, and most of the people howling at his jokes had no idea the word even existed. Sarcoidosis is a strange and stubborn disease. The immune system, for reasons doctors still cannot fully explain, starts forming little clusters of inflamed cells called granulomas in the body's organs, and it loves to attack the lungs most of all. He was diagnosed back in the 1980s and learned to live alongside it while his star kept climbing, from stand-up stages to the Bernie Mac Show to the Ocean's 11 films. He even reached a point where the disease was said to be in remission, quieted down, but never truly gone. That was the trap. Years of inflammation had already left his lungs scarred and weakened. So, when a severe case of pneumonia hit him in 2008, he did not have the reserves to fight it. The infection tore through him faster than the treatments could keep up, and he died at just 50. For a lot of his fans, the saddest news came with a second shock, because his passing was the first time they had ever heard of the disease that had been shadowing him the entire time they were laughing. Number 18, Chadwick Boseman. For 4 years, one of Hollywood's biggest stars walked red carpets, threw punches on movie sets, and smiled for millions while a cancer quietly ate away at his body. Almost nobody knew. Chadwick Boseman was the face of Black Panther, the noble king of Wakanda, a hero who felt untouchable on screen. Off-screen, he was fighting something no crown could shield him from. It began in 2016, the same year his career exploded. Doctors told him he had stage 3 colon cancer, a disease that usually stalks people over 50, not a fit man in his late 30s. The early warnings are easy to wave off: a little weight loss, a dull stomach ache, tiredness that never lifts. Buried under one of the busiest schedules in the industry, he pushed through and told almost no one. What came next is hard to picture. While the cancer spread and the treatments drained him, he kept working. Surgeries 1 week, fight choreography the next. He shot Black Panther, Avengers, Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame while sitting through chemotherapy between takes. The armor and strength that fans cheered for hid a man in constant pain. By 2020, the disease had reached stage 4, and his body could no longer keep the secret. Photos of his thinning frame spread online, and instead of concern, some people mocked how frail he looked. They had no idea they were watching a man live out his final months. On the 28th of August, 2020, his family shared the news that froze the world. The king of Wakanda was gone at just 43, defeated not by a villain, but by a real disease that works in silence. His death pushed thousands to finally take colon cancer seriously, especially young adults and African Americans, who carry the highest risk of all. Number 17, Aretha Franklin. She had one of the most powerful voices ever recorded, yet in her last years, The woman who could fill any stadium grew quiet about the one subject that mattered most. Concerts vanished from her calendar. Appearances got canceled with vague explanations. Fans could see something was wrong, but Aretha Franklin, fiercely private to the end, refused to spell it out. The truth came out only after she died in 2018 at 76. For years, she had been living with a pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor, a rare form of the disease that most people never even hear of. It is worth separating from the common kind because the pancreatic cancer that kills so fast comes from different cells and moves like wildfire. Hers grew from the hormone-producing cells instead, a slower and stranger version, which is part of how she kept going for as long as she did. And keep going, she did. Even as her health slipped, she performed whenever her body would allow it, still promising she would be back on stage soon. That stubbornness was not new. It was the same fire that turned a preacher's daughter from Detroit into the Queen of Soul. She sang almost to the very end, and she kept the details of her illness her own business right up until there was nothing left to hide. Number 16, Eazy-E. He walked into a Los Angeles hospital in early 1990, certain he was dealing with bad asthma, maybe a stubborn chest infection. He walked out with a death sentence. Eric Wright, known to the world as Eazy-E, was a founding force of NWA and one of the architects of gangsta rap, and in a matter of weeks, a disease he never saw coming would end his life. The doctors told him it was not asthma at all. It was advanced AIDS. The news detonated through his family and the entire music world, in part because HIV in that era was wrongly boxed into certain communities, and a hard-edged rapper did not fit the cruel and false stereotype people carried in their heads. That shock was exactly why his story mattered. The virus does not check anyone's background. He did something brave with the little time he had. He put out a letter to his fans, admitting his condition and urging young people to take HIV seriously and protect themselves. Then, barely a month after the diagnosis that blindsided him, he was gone at just 30. Killed by pneumonia, his ravaged immune system could not fight off. His sudden death hit the hip-hop world like a warning shot, forcing a conversation about a disease the community had mostly refused to talk about. Number 15, Michael Jackson. The most famous face on the planet was slowly losing its color, and for years the world guessed at everything except the truth. People whispered that he hated being black and accused him of bleaching himself pale on purpose. What almost nobody understood was that Michael Jackson had no say in it at all. His skin was being drained by a disease, patch by patch, and he was fighting a losing battle to hide it. It crept in during the early 1980s, right as Thriller turned him into the biggest star music had ever seen. Small, pale spots showed up first, easy to cover with a dab of makeup. But vitiligo does not stay small. It is an autoimmune condition, meaning the body's own defenses attack the cells that give skin its color. And once it spreads, there is no calling it back. The blotches grew and connected until the contrast became impossible to manage. So he made a brutal choice, undergoing treatments to lighten the rest of his skin to match, chasing an even tone the only way left to him. The cost was misery. His skin grew so fragile that sunlight became an enemy, which is part of why the umbrellas and covered arms became such a fixed part of his image. The rumors wore him down into depression and painkillers. In 1993, he finally sat with Oprah Winfrey and told the world he had vitiligo, that this was a disease and not a choice, but plenty of people refused to believe him. Only after he died in 2009, when the autopsy confirmed the pigment loss across his whole body, did the doubt finally quiet. A man mocked for decades had been telling the truth the entire time. Number 14, Arthur Ashe. He had already survived a heart attack and gone under the knife for bypass surgery, and somewhere in that fight to save his life, the thing that would eventually kill him slipped quietly into his veins. Arthur Ashe was one of the greatest tennis players who ever lived, and one of the most dignified men the sport ever produced. The enemy that took him down had nothing to do with a racket. In 1983, during heart surgery, he received a blood transfusion. This was before hospitals routinely screened donated blood, and that gap had deadly consequences. The blood carried HIV. He had no way of knowing, and for years the virus lived in him undetected, while he went on with his life. When he finally learned the truth, he kept it locked away, protecting his wife and young daughter from a diagnosis that, in that era, came drenched in fear and shame. He might have kept that privacy forever, but in 1992, he was warned that a newspaper planned to print the story whether he liked it or not. Cornered, he decided that if the world was going to know, he would be the one to say it. Instead of hiding, he stepped fully into the fight. He spent what time he had left educating people, pushing back against the panic around AIDS, and raising money for research through the foundation he built. He died in 1993, but he spent his last chapter turning a private tragedy into a public cause. Number 13. Richard Pryor. The man who reinvented stand-up, who said the things no one else dared, and made audiences roar with his fearless honesty, spent his final 20 years slowly losing control of the body that made him a legend. Richard Pryor was struck by a disease that stole the two things a comedian needs most: his movement and his voice. Strange things started happening in the late 1970s. He would stumble on stage for no reason. His legs stiffened. His hands trembled so badly he could hardly grip a microphone. For a while, he blamed the drinking and drugs that had shadowed his life. But in 1986, the real answer came: multiple sclerosis, a disease where the immune system chews away at the protective coating around the nerves, scrambling the signals between brain and body. This was no hangover to sleep off. It was a slow sentence with no escape. The decline was cruel and steady. By the early 1990s, he needed a wheelchair. By the middle of the decade, his voice, that razor-sharp weapon that built his whole career, was slipping away. A man who had made the entire world laugh ended up unable to walk or speak, watching life happen around him. He kept making appearances and never fully hid, becoming one of the most visible faces of the disease. He died in 2005, officially of a heart attack, though in truth the illness had been taking him for years. Number 12. Stuart Scott. He changed the way sports sounded on television, bringing a swagger and a rhythm to the ESPN desk that nobody had heard before. Then Stuart Scott was handed one of the rarest cancers there is, and he turned his own dying into a lesson the whole country took to heart. The disease was appendiceal cancer, which starts in the appendix and shows up so rarely that most people never encounter it. It is sneaky, giving almost no warning until it has already spread. Over 7 years, he went through surgery after surgery and round after round of chemotherapy, the cancer retreating and then coming back, again and again. Through all of it, he kept anchoring and even trained in mixed martial arts as a way of throwing punches back at the thing trying to kill him. What made him unforgettable was how he framed the fight. He told people that you do not beat cancer by whether you live or die, you beat it by how you live. And that idea rippled far beyond sports. In 2015, the disease finally won the physical battle, and he died. But the way he carried himself through those years, refusing to be reduced to a patient, left behind a message about courage that outlasted him completely. Number 11. Dilla. One of the most worshipped minds in hip-hop was fading away in a wheelchair, his body betraying him a little more each day, and he answered by making some of the best music of his life. Dilla was a genius behind the boards, the producer other producers studied, and a rare blood disease spent his final years trying to shut him down. The illness was thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura, a mouthful of a name for a terrifying disorder in which tiny clots form all through the bloodstream, blocking vessels and starving the body. It ground him down relentlessly. He needed constant transfusions, spent long stretches in the hospital, and eventually could barely walk, working from a wheelchair as his health collapsed around him. Rather than wait for the end, he poured himself into his craft. Bedridden and running out of time, he finished his album, Donuts, piecing together beats from his hospital bed. He completed it just days before he died in 2006, only a few days after his birthday. The record became one of the most beloved and studied works in all of hip-hop, proof that even as the disease took his body, it could not touch what was in his head. He created right up to his last breath. Number 10. Flo Hyman. She stood 6 feet 5 inches tall and towered over the sport she helped put on the map, one of the finest volleyball players America ever produced. But inside that extraordinary frame was a hidden crack, a ticking fault line no one had spotted. And one afternoon in Japan, it gave way without a single second of warning. It was the 24th of January, 1986, during a match, when Flo Hyman came out of the game and sat down on the bench. Moments later, she slumped over and collapsed. There was no clutching injury, no dramatic fall on the court, just a sudden stillness that no one could reverse. Within minutes, she was gone, and nobody around her understood how a world-class athlete in peak condition could simply drop dead. The autopsy uncovered the answer. She had Marfan syndrome, a genetic disorder that weakens the body's connective tissue, the material that holds everything together. In her case, it had quietly stretched and ballooned the wall of her aorta, the body's main artery, until it tore open. Once that happened, there was nothing anyone could have done in time. Her death was not wasted, though. It forced the sports world to take heart screening seriously, and it put a spotlight on a condition that often hides inside tall, athletic bodies, silently waiting. Number 9. Hank Gathers. He was one of the most electrifying players in college basketball, a scoring machine who looked unstoppable. And then, in the middle of a game, his own heart quit on him with the whole arena watching. Hank Gathers had already had one terrifying warning, and the second one would not let him get back up. The trouble surfaced when he collapsed during a game earlier in his career, only to be diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a condition that thickens the heart muscle abnormally and can trigger deadly rhythms out of nowhere. He was put on medication to steady his heart, but the drugs dulled his edge, slowing the explosive athlete he had always been. Desperate to play at full power, he cut back on his dose, a gamble with the highest possible stakes. In 1990, on the court once again, the gamble came due. After a powerful dunk, he turned to head back down the floor, then staggered and crumpled. The building went silent as medics rushed to him and worked to bring him back. This time, his heart would not answer. He was pronounced dead not long after, and his loss became one of the most haunting tragedies in sports, pushing schools and leagues to rethink how they screen young athletes for hidden heart disease. Number 8. Gary Coleman. America fell in love with a sharp-witted little boy and his famous catchphrase. But the same disease that made Gary Coleman look forever young was quietly wrecking him from the inside. His small stature was not just a quirk of genetics. It was the visible mark of a serious illness that shaped his entire life. He was born with a congenital kidney condition, a defect so rare and so severe that it stunted his growth and kept his body from ever developing the way it should. While other kids shot up around him, he stayed small, which is part of what made him such a perfect fit for a child role on Different Strokes. But that on-screen cuteness masked a brutal medical reality. His kidneys were failing, and from a young age, he depended on dialysis just to stay alive, along with transplants that his body kept rejecting. Fame did not spare him. He became one of the biggest television stars of the 1980s, while enduring treatments no child should have to face, and the anti-rejection drugs left him in constant discomfort. The medical struggles followed him for the rest of his life. And in 2010, a fall at home led to a brain hemorrhage that ended it. He died at 42, a man the world still pictured as the little boy he had been forced to remain. Number 7. Reggie White. He was one of the most feared defensive players the NFL ever saw. A mountain of a man who bulldozed offensive lines for years, So when Reggie White died suddenly, not long after walking away from the game, few people could believe that the thing that killed him had been hiding inside him the whole time, and that barely anyone knew he was sick. The disease was sarcoidosis, the same inflammatory condition that can invade organs throughout the body, especially the lungs and the heart. In his case, it had been doing damage quietly, out of the public eye, while he was still known to the world as an unbreakable athlete. The inflammation attacked the systems that keep a body running, and it did so without the kind of obvious warning signs that send people racing to a doctor. In 2004, only a few years into his retirement, it caught up with him. He suffered a fatal combination of a heart rhythm problem and breathing trouble, and by the time help reached him, it was too late. His family later revealed how large a role sarcoidosis had played in his decline. His death became a stark reminder that a disease most people had never heard of could quietly take down even the strongest man in the room. Number 6. Heavy D. He had spent years out of the spotlight and had just stepped back into it, even performing at an awards show that had fans thrilled to see him again. Then, only days later, Heavy D collapsed outside his home and was gone. And the cause turned out to be something that can strike almost anyone. The rap star, beloved for his charm and his hits, had been feeling off in the time leading up to it. His legs ached, and he felt worn down, but it seemed minor. The kind of thing easy to brush aside. What he did not know was that a blood clot had formed deep in his leg, a condition called deep vein thrombosis. A long flight, with its hours of sitting still, is exactly the kind of situation that can set such a clot loose. That is what happened. The clot broke free and traveled up through his body until it lodged in his lungs, a pulmonary embolism that choked off his breathing. On that day in 2011, he collapsed and could not be saved, dead at just 44. His shocking death put a spotlight on how quietly deadly blood clots can be, and how a problem starting in the leg can end a life in minutes. Number 5. Wilma Rudolph. As a child, she wore braces on her legs, and doctors doubted she would ever walk without them, having been struck down by polio. She not only walked, she ran faster than almost any woman alive, becoming the first American woman to win 3 gold medals at a single Olympics. She was one of 22 children in a poor Tennessee family, sick constantly as a kid. And yet by her teens, she was already fast enough to bring home a bronze from the Melbourne Olympics. 4 years later in Rome, she blew the doors off, taking the 100 meters, the 200 meters, and anchoring the relay to a 3rd gold, all while running on an ankle she had twisted before the race. Sports writers called her the fastest woman in the world, and for a while, nobody could touch her. She later poured herself into coaching and mentoring, building a foundation to give kids the kind of chance she once had to fight for. Her triumph in Rome turned her into a global icon and a powerful figure in the civil rights movement. She used that fame with purpose, famously insisting that a homecoming celebration in her honor in Tennessee be open to everyone regardless of race, making it one of the first integrated events her town had ever held. Her whole story was about breaking through walls others thought were permanent. Then, in the early 1990s, came a diagnosis with no comeback. Aggressive cancers had taken hold in her brain and her throat, and this time the disease moved faster than her legendary will could match. She died in 1994, at only 54, just months after learning how sick she was. Number 4. Charlie Murphy. He was the older brother of a comedy superstar, a former Navy man, and a scene stealer in his own right, the guy whose wild true stories on Chappelle's show became legend. Nobody watching Charlie Murphy hold a room together would have guessed his own blood was quietly plotting to kill him. The trouble arrived as vague, easy-to-dismiss signals late in his life. A bone-deep tiredness that would not shake, aches with no clear cause, skin gone strangely pale, bruises that showed up without a bump to explain them, and weight melting off him. When doctors finally named it, the answer was acute myeloid leukemia. one of the most aggressive cancers of the blood and bone marrow there is. This disease does not give people the luxury of time. It floods the body fast, and every week of delay can be the difference between living and dying. Like so many others, he kept it to himself. He went through treatment privately, still cracking jokes about his situation, refusing to let anyone see him as a victim. But the cancer moved too quickly. In 2017, he died, and because he had guarded his illness so closely, the news landed on fans who had no clue he was even sick. One of comedy's great tough guys had been fighting for his life in silence. Number 3, Natalie Cole. She carried a famous last name and a voice worthy of it, but her body spent years under siege from a series of illnesses that kept stacking on top of one another. Natalie Cole fought through more medical battles than most people know, and the one that finally took her was a rare disease that quietly strangled her lungs. It started with hepatitis C, likely picked up decades earlier, which eventually damaged her kidneys badly enough that she needed a transplant in 2009. But surviving that was not the end of the road. Some years later, she was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, a rare and progressive condition in which the blood vessels in the lungs narrow and stiffen, forcing the heart to strain harder and harder just to push blood through. Over time, that strain wears out the right side of the heart, and it steadily robs a person of the ability to breathe and move freely. Even as her health declined, she kept recording and performing whenever she was able, unwilling to let the illness have the last word on her career. In 2015, her heart finally gave out, and she died from that failure, leaving behind 9 Grammy Awards and one of the most touching father-daughter duets ever recorded. Number 2, Lou Rawls. That deep velvet baritone was one of the most recognizable sounds in music, but in his final years, Lou Rawls was locked in a fight his voice could not win. A cancer had taken root in his lungs, and it was not content to stay there. He was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2004, and although he went through treatment, the disease pushed on and spread to his brain, which sharply lowered whatever chance he had left. In his last stretch, he tried both the standard medical routes and alternative therapies, chasing anything that might buy him more time, while still lending his name to the causes that had always mattered to him. Away from the stage, his biggest legacy may have been his tireless work for the UNCF, where his efforts helped raise enormous sums for scholarships and put countless young people through school. He died in 2006 at 72, remembered not only for the hits and that unmistakable voice, but as one of the most effective and generous givers the music world ever produced. Number 1, Bill Withers. He wrote songs that everyone knows by heart, then walked away from fame far earlier than anyone expected, and spent decades living out of the spotlight by choice. When Bill Withers died, most people had no idea his heart had been slowly failing him, the valves inside it wearing down over the years. His family shared that the cause was complications from chronic heart disease, specifically damage to his heart valves. These valves are meant to keep blood flowing in the right direction, opening and closing with every beat. When they stop working properly, blood flow gets disrupted, and the heart is forced to labor harder over time, a strain that can gradually build toward failure if it goes unchecked. He died in 2020 at 81, having long since traded the music business for a quiet private life. But the songs he left behind never faded. Across soul, pop, rhythm and blues, and hip-hop, generation after generation kept reaching for his music, so that a man who stepped away from the spotlight decades earlier remained everywhere, even in his absence. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.